I was in the hotel lobby at midnight because the buyer's delegation had just landed early, impatient, and already questioning whether our final signatory would be available by morning. Deals like this never sleep. Someone always wants reassurance. And for 20 years. That someone had been me. I hadn't even sat down when Silas Trent stepped out of the elevator with his legal advisor. Silas, our CEO, moved the way men do when they believe timing itself works for them. He didn't ask how the meeting went. He didn't ask why I was still awake. He said, calmly, Joanne, we're restructuring. Your role ends tonight. The word tonight landed harder than the sentence. No conference room, no formal process, just polished marble, late-hour witnesses, and a decision he clearly rehearsed. His advisor extended a hand and asked for my access card, as if we were exchanging business cards instead of erasing 2 decades. While writing this story, I had to sit right next to the heater because the cold was seeping into my bones. How about where you are? What's the temperature like right now? And if you're still here, still listening this far, leave your lucky number below so I know you're with me. I was the senior transaction lead, the one holding the final legal structure of a $3.2 billion acquisition together. I was the last fiduciary signer still recognized by both sides. Silas preferred to call that legacy overhead. He smiled while he talked. He always did. We need clean lines before we sign, he said, as if order came from subtraction. I looked at him and asked the only question that mattered. Are you sure you want to do this right now? Silas didn't hesitate. He smiled wider, satisfied with his own courage. I nodded, thanked him for the clarity, and walked toward the exit. I didn't go back to my room. I had one call to make. That moment in the lobby was only the beginning. Before we continue, I want to share a small note. This story is partially fictionalized and uses artificial intelligence to help clarify ideas and create a deeper emotional impact. I hope it resonates with you, and if it doesn't, feel free to step away, get some rest, and take care of yourself. Your health matters more than any story. By the time I reached my car, the anger had settled into something heavier. 20 years does that. It compresses outrage into discipline. I had spent 2 decades stepping into deals everyone else wanted to abandon. I stopped lawsuits before they reached court, saving hundreds of millions in settlements that would have bled companies dry. I pulled transactions back from the edge after regulators circled, after partners walked, after boards quietly panicked. Silas Trent used to call that talent. Lately, he called it process. He liked that word. Process meant replaceable. Process meant the work mattered, but the person didn't. I watched him repeat it in meetings while leaning on numbers I had stabilized, structures I had rebuilt, signatures I had protected. Tonight, he proved he believed it. The email hit my phone while I was still in the garage. Joanne Miles resigned, effective immediately. No farewell, no acknowledgement, just a line item, neatly formatted, ready for forwarding. I didn't reply. Silence was the only response that still belonged to me. I started the engine and opened my laptop on the passenger seat. Habit took over. I pulled up the deal responsibility chain, scrolling past names, roles, delegated authorities. The deeper I went, the quieter the car became. There it was, exactly where it had always been. My name, final fiduciary signatory, active, unreleased. The bitterness sharpened into focus. This wasn't just disrespect. It was a mistake. Silas hadn't removed me from a project. He had removed the wrong link. Understanding the mistake didn't bring relief. It brought clarity, the kind that strips emotion down to facts. I wasn't angry anymore. I was alert. In transactions like this, emotion clouds judgment. Structure does not, legally. The situation was simple. I was the last active fiduciary representative on record, not a consultant, not an advisor, the signer with standing, until the final transfer closed. Responsibility did not disappear just because a CEO felt impatient. You could remove a person from a payroll system. You could not erase accountability midstream without replacement. Fire the final signer too early, and the deal doesn't move forward. It floats, untethered. waiting for someone who no longer exists. Silas either didn't understand that, or chose not to care. I replayed his words in my head. Clean breaks make strong leaders. He liked declarations. He trusted momentum more than law. In his mind, the deal was already done. Paperwork was ceremony. Risk belonged to other people. I considered sending an email. A single paragraph would have been enough. I could have warned him, documented the exposure, protected the company from itself. That had always been my role. Tonight, I closed the draft without typing a word. Silence was not negligence. It was accuracy. If I explained the problem, he would rush to fix it. If I stayed quiet, the structure would speak for itself. That wasn't strategy. That was sequence. The next morning, while I sat in traffic watching frost melt off the windshield, my phone vibrated. No message. Just an automated update from the transaction portal. The status line had changed. Where it once read, approved for execution, it now said pending clarification of authority. I didn't smile. I didn't react. I let the engine idle and watched the words settle into place. This was no longer personal. It was procedural. And procedures. Once triggered. Do not care who issued the order. That was the moment I understood the leverage had shifted completely. Quietly and legally, without a single raised voice, without retaliation, and without me having to ask permission from anyone involved at all thereafter. By the time I dialed the buyer's private line, I was calm enough to hear my own breathing again. The silence around me felt earned, not empty. When the line connected, I didn't introduce myself with titles or history. They already knew who I was. I said my name once, evenly, and waited. Someone on the other end acknowledged it. Cautious but attentive. I'm not calling to complain, I said, and I'm not asking to be reinstated. That earned a pause. People expect emotion after a public dismissal. They expect leverage or threats. I gave them neither. I only need clarity. I continued. Do you still want to proceed without a valid fiduciary signer? The question landed exactly where it should have. I could almost hear documents being pulled back onto desks. No one answered right away. The silence stretched long enough to become informative. In deals of this size, silence is never accidental. It means someone is calculating the cost of a sentence they didn't expect to hear. Eventually, a voice said, carefully, "Are you saying the authority hasn't transferred?" "I'm saying it can't," I replied. "Not yet." I didn't explain further. Explanation invites debate. Facts do not. I let them sit with it. Let them trace the chain on their own. They understood the difference between a signature and a story. Another pause followed. Heavier this time. I pictured conference rooms, muted phones, people leaning back in chairs that suddenly felt less comfortable. Finally, the voice returned. "We need a moment." "Of course," I said. "Take 15 minutes, then call me back." I ended the call before politeness could turn into negotiation. I wasn't pushing. I was stepping aside and letting gravity do its work. The calm surprised even me. For the first time that night, the situation felt balanced, almost ironic. I had been fired for being unnecessary. Now the entire transaction was waiting for me to stop being quiet. That silence, once forced on me, had quietly become the most valuable asset there. If you agree with how I handled that moment by staying calm, asking the right question, and letting the facts speak instead of emotions, press A in the comments. Silas reacted the way men like him always do when momentum slips, by pressing harder. While I waited, the meeting rooms upstairs filled again. Screens lit up, voices sharpened. From what I later learned, Silas convened legal, finance, and compliance and told them to move forward as if nothing had changed. "We don't need her anymore," he said, loud enough to end discussion. "The structure stands. Sign what's ready." No one corrected him. Lawyers rarely do when authority sounds confident. They ask questions quietly instead. Passing notes, shifting language, buying time. Silas mistook that caution for agreement. He pushed timelines forward, demanded revised drafts within hours, and insisted partners confirm attendance for the final signing. But confidence does not travel well across cautious borders. One by one, the partners began to stall. A breakfast meeting was postponed. A video call moved to be determined. An agenda item quietly disappeared. Silas interpreted the delays as negotiation tactics. "They're blinking," he told the room. "Stay firm." The harder he leaned, the more brittle the moment became. His power was visible but hollow, like a signature written before the ink dries. He spoke in absolutes, declaring certainty into a process that no longer recognized him as complete. Then the message arrived. It didn't come with urgency or explanation, just a line forwarded from the transaction portal, delivered to his assistant, then printed and placed in front of him. Counterparty requests clarification of authority. The room went still, not silent, but tight. Someone asked what it meant. Someone else suggested it was routine. Silas waved them off, irritation replacing confidence. "Send them our org chart," he said. "They know who's in charge." What he didn't understand was that control isn't declared, it's acknowledged. And the moment the question was asked, the deal stopped responding to his voice. It was no longer waiting for his insistence. It was waiting for something he had already thrown away. By the time the call came back, his authority existed only in titles, not outcomes. And the room finally understood the difference between command and actual responsibility thereafter. I took the return call, standing in the same spot, phone steady in my hand. The tone was different now, measured, respectful. No one rushed to speak. "We're still proceeding," the lead negotiator said at last. "But not through your former company." I let the statement pass without reaction. Silence kept things clean. He continued, choosing each word carefully. "Given the unresolved authority issue, we're prepared to close the acquisition independently. We need your signature, Joanne, personally, as an independent fiduciary." There it was. No apology, no theatrics. Just reality aligning itself. I didn't ask for terms. I didn't ask for leverage. I didn't even ask when. Control isn't asserted through questions. It's exercised through restraint. "You understand," I said, "that this isn't a rescue." "We do," he replied. "This is about completion." That distinction mattered. I wasn't being brought back. I wasn't reinstated. Silas Trent had removed himself the moment he decided authority was cosmetic. The deal hadn't failed. It had simply changed hands. I confirmed my availability and ended the call. No celebration followed, no vindication rush. I reviewed the documents alone, line by line, the way I always had. The structure was intact. The risk allocations were sound. The responsibility chain ended exactly where it should. With me, later. I learned how the message reached Silas. Not dramatically, not publicly. Just a formal notice routed through counsel. The buyer would proceed without his company's participation. No explanation beyond necessity. He protested. Of course, demanded calls, claimed misunderstanding. None of it mattered. The decision wasn't punitive. It was procedural. He had terminated the only recognized signer before completion. The system responded accordingly. When I signed, it was quiet. No witnesses beyond compliance. No speeches. Just a pen moving with finality. The acquisition closed at full value, $3.2 billion. Cleanly transferred. Silas Trent was not included. Not because anyone excluded him, but because he excluded himself. He fired certainty at the wrong moment and lost the right to finish what he started. Control returned to structure, law, and timing, exactly where it had always belonged finally. The shift didn't announce itself with shouting or slammed doors. It arrived quietly, the way panic usually does in boardrooms through urgent calendars, missed calls, and voices that suddenly lost their edge. I learned about it from my phone lighting up again. This time, it wasn't the buyer. It was Silas Trent. I let it ring once, twice. On the third attempt, I answered, "Joanne," he said. His voice was lower than I remembered. "Careful. We need to talk." That was new. Silas had never needed before. He had only decided, "I'm listening." I said. There's some confusion, he began, choosing words like they might explode. The board wants clarification. We just need you on a quick internal call to straighten things out. Straighten things out. I almost smiled. I'm not available for internal meetings, I replied. I'm no longer internal. A pause followed. Not silence, hesitation. This doesn't have to be difficult, he said. You know how these situations escalate. I do. I answered. That's why I'm staying out of it. He exhaled. Audible now, just 10 minutes. He tried. As a courtesy. Courtesy. Another new word. I declined again and ended the call before he could recover his authority. What Silas didn't tell me was how fast the board had unraveled. Emergency sessions. Outside counsel dialed in. Questions stacked on top of each other with nowhere to land. Why was the deal closed without them? Why was the buyer no longer engaging? Why had the only recognized fiduciary signer been dismissed hours before execution? The question they kept circling wasn't about me. It was about him. By the afternoon, the request became formal. Not a meeting invitation, a notice. The board required a written explanation for the termination decision, including timing, risk assessment, and justification under fiduciary duty standards. Silas had fired me in public confidence. Now he had to explain it in private precision. I read the notice forwarded to me by counsel and felt something settle, not triumph. Not joy, satisfaction, quiet and contained. I hadn't argued. I hadn't interfered. I had simply stepped aside and let accountability find the person who dismissed it, for the first time since the lobby. The pressure wasn't on me, and I didn't have to do anything at all to keep it there. The closing happened without ceremony. No crowded room, no applause, no congratulatory speeches, just a secure conference line, a finalized document set, and a clear sequence of confirmations. The acquisition moved forward at full value $3.2 billion. Transferred cleanly, legally, and without delay. I signed last, not because of hierarchy, but because responsibility ends where certainty does. My name appeared alone on the signature line, labeled Independent Fiduciary. No corporate logo, no executive title, just accountability. Attached to a person instead of an organization. There was no negotiation left to win. The terms had already been agreed. The structure had already survived scrutiny. This wasn't a victory lap. It was a completion when the confirmation arrived. I acknowledged it with a single word and closed my laptop. My former company received nothing. No advisory fee, no participation credit, no future consideration. Their absence wasn't punitive, it was procedural. They had removed themselves from the chain before it finished linking. Systems don't avenge. They continue. Later that afternoon, headlines began to circulate. Industry outlets praised the transaction for its discipline and timing. Analysts called it a model close, noting the absence of post-signing disputes, the clarity of authority, the lack of last-minute volatility. One article described it as a clean execution under pressure. I read the coverage without satisfaction. Justice doesn't announce itself with emotion. It arrives quietly, wrapped in process, and leaves no room for argument. No one mentioned Silas Trent by name. They didn't need to. The story no longer required him. By evening, the market had absorbed the news and moved on. That, more than anything, confirmed the outcome. The deal stood on its own, unchallenged and complete. I hadn't forced anything. I hadn't reclaimed a position. I had simply remained where the law placed me when someone else stepped away. Cold justice isn't loud. It doesn't celebrate. It resolves, documents, and moves forward. That night, the transaction closed exactly as it should have all along, without the people who believed control mattered more than timing. In the end, structure always outlives ego. By the time the board meeting convened, the damage was already visible. I wasn't in the room, but I didn't need to be. Panic leaves patterns, calls multiply, calendars fracture. People stop pretending they understand what's happening. The first question came from a major shareholder, blunt and unsparing. Why did we lose a closed deal? No soft framing. No courtesy. Just arithmetic and anger. Silas Trent tried to answer. That was his first mistake. He spoke about timing, miscommunication, external interference. He avoided the word responsibility as if it might attach itself to him if spoken aloud. Every explanation circled the same hollow center authority had vanished when he needed it most. Someone asked for documentation. Someone else asked why the fiduciary signer had been terminated hours before execution. Silas stalled. He blamed advisors. He blamed assumptions. He blamed a process he had dismantled himself. I received fragments afterward through counsel. The board pressed harder. Where is the legal basis for that decision? Silence followed. Not the useful kind. The kind that exposes absence. Silas had confidence, but no statute. Urgency, but no justification. The room shifted. Once it does, there's no recovering balance. Questions turned procedural. Votes were mentioned. Outside counsel was instructed to assess exposure, not optics. Fiduciary duty isn't philosophical. It's measurable. When the conclusion came, it was delivered clinically. Silas Trent was removed for breach of duty to shareholders. Not misconduct, not scandal. Failure of judgment at a critical moment. Documented and undeniable. I didn't feel relief when I heard. Collapse isn't satisfying when it's this quiet. A career unraveled without spectacle. Reduced to a finding and a footnote. The same efficiency he admired had finally found him. By evening, the market had already absorbed the leadership change. Analysts adjusted forecasts. Employees refreshed inboxes. Silas disappeared into process, exactly where he had placed others. I closed the file and stepped away. Panic had burned itself out, leaving order behind. The system hadn't chosen sides. It had simply enforced sequence. And that, in the end, was the most unforgiving outcome of all, especially those who ignored warnings. I left the hotel just after sunrise, when the lobby belonged to no one important. The night staff nodded politely. No one stopped me. No one asked for a statement. That silence felt earned. I didn't look back at the elevators or the conference rooms upstairs. There was nothing left there for me. The deal was closed. The board had decided. The system had finished its work. My role ended exactly where it was supposed to, without applause or regret. Outside, the city was already moving. Cars merged, coffee shops opened, markets adjusted. Life accepted the outcome faster than any person involved ever could. That, more than any headline, confirmed the justice of it. I didn't return calls. I didn't offer commentary. Silence was not avoidance. It was completion. Speaking would have softened something that needed to remain sharp. As I walked away, one thought stayed with me. Clean and unchallenged. They fired me to move faster. The world moved on without them. And for the first time since the lobby, I felt nothing pressing on my chest. I didn't tell this story to celebrate a fall. I told it to remember a line I almost crossed. When power shifts suddenly, the temptation is to punish, to prove someone wrong. But what stayed with me wasn't revenge. It was dignity. There is a quiet moment after something unjust happens. When you realize you still get to choose who you are next. I could have warned, intervened, or forced my way back in. Instead, I stepped aside and let the structure do what it was built to do. The outcome wasn't loud, but it was fair. So here's the question I keep asking myself, and I'll ask you too. If you were treated unfairly, would you try to win by humiliating someone else? Or would you protect your own integrity and let consequences unfold on their own terms? Which choice would you be proud to explain years later? This isn't a lesson about being passive. It's about knowing when action means restraint, and when silence is actually responsibility. Not every fight needs your voice. Some only need your steadiness. If this story made you pause, I'm grateful. If you want to hear more stories that explore power, fairness, and the cost of our decisions, consider subscribing to the channel. Like or share this video if it might help someone else think through a hard moment. And if you have a thought, leave it in the comments. I read them. We learn faster when we listen to each other together.